Everything begins in a very unexpected way. A young albino, who clearly seems to be the protagonist, awakens in the middle of a narrow alley, completely confused by the situation. Without understanding how he ended up there, he decides to walk through the surrounding streets. When he reaches a very busy avenue, one question does not leave his mind. What place is this? The people around him stare at him with strangeness as he passes by. Some whisper among themselves, trying to understand what a possible noble would be doing in that area. Others wonder if he might be walking incognito, and if so, who he really might be. Meanwhile, the protagonist realizes that he can understand the language spoken in that place, but even so he does not exactly understand the meaning of many comments. At a certain moment, a woman is buying fruits at a stall, and he approaches the vendor without any ceremony. Both the merchant and the customer are startled and become visibly nervous, but the albino simply greets them naturally and moves on, still immersed in his thoughts. He comments to himself that he had never seen those coins before. Not only that, but being an apparently very large country, he cannot figure out exactly where he is. After walking for quite a long time, he begins to run into people of all kinds. At a given moment, he spots a group wearing swords and armor, discussing a labyrinth. The protagonist imagines that they are mercenaries, without realizing that the country seems to be on the verge of starting a war. Curious to obtain information, he decides to sell some of his belongings. It is then that he spots an appraisal shop and decides to enter. The seller receives him politely, but becomes visibly tense upon noticing the noble appearance of the client. The protagonist greets him calmly and asks if he is available. The seller replies that he is, although inwardly he questions why a noble has entered his shop. Suddenly, the albino explains that he would like to sell something. The seller says that, before that, he needs to examine the item. The protagonist then removes his sword and places it on the table, while attentively observing the products around him. Among them, he notices a map hanging on the wall that he does not recognize at all. While analyzing the place, he hears the seller comment that the decoration of the sword is impressive and that its design is something never seen before. Realizing that he spoke too much, the brown-haired man apologizes for his lack of caution. The protagonist reassures him, saying that he does not intend to get irritated over a simple compliment. He then asks about the value. The seller responds that he can pay 200 gold coins. Without hesitation, the albino accepts, and a few seconds later a large quantity of coins appears on the table. He gives thanks, but soon asks if there is some suitable place to store them. The seller then presents him with some wallet models. Taking advantage of the moment, the protagonist asks to also buy the map that was hanging on the wall. The seller agrees, but first asks which wallet he prefers. The albino leaves the choice to the merchant's discretion, something that makes him a little nervous. After selecting the accessory, the seller explains how to store the coins properly. The protagonist becomes fascinated by that. Next, the seller comments that the special models, intended for people who possess magic, are more expensive and exist in smaller variety. Upon hearing the word magic, the albino reflects on whether that really is magic or if it is something different from the witchcraft he knows. Soon after, he resumes walking through the city streets, feeling a strange familiarity with that place, similar to the sensation he had in his country of origin. Even so, this similarity only makes him feel even more out of place. Thinking once again about gathering information, he concludes that he needs to find someone willing to help him, someone who is not afraid to speak their mind, who has a minimum of morals and is capable of reading between the lines. While reflecting on this, he is interrupted by a man who warns him not to enter a certain alley. The protagonist thanks him, and, when the man walks away, throws him a coin. The young man catches it easily and asks what he wants. After apologizing, he introduces himself as Lizel and says that he only wants to talk. As he says this, the protagonist deliberately drops a few coins, making the man understand the message and follow him. Thus, they end up entering a bar. The dark-haired man asks the bartender to prepare a table farther away. While walking there, Lizel greets the attendant, who is also puzzled by the situation. Already seated, they receive drinks. The dark-haired man asks what Lizel wants to know. But before answering, Lizel says that a simple exchange of information would be boring. He comments that he could talk about profession, past relationships, or personal tastes, anything to get to know each other better. With little alternative, the man introduces himself as Gil, a rank B adventurer. He says that he has never had a girlfriend and does not intend to have one, claiming to be someone cold and solitary. Upon hearing this, Lizel deduces that those armed people he saw around the city were also adventurers. He comments that, even with Gil saying he does not want a girlfriend, he certainly does not lack interested women. Gil replies that he can believe that. At that moment, Gil becomes more attentive, curious to know who Lizel really is. He is a level B adventurer who usually acts alone, but strangely he was not bothered by his presence. He cannot say whether Lizel is someone truly powerful, or just a noble without knowledge of the world. Lizel takes a sip of his drink and comments that Gil seems quite intelligent for asking so many questions. Gil then asks whether he will also answer the questions he asks. Lizel returns the question, wanting to know how much Gil wishes to know. Gil replies that he wants to know everything, including details about his love life. Lizel says that he has no fixed job nor anything that proves his social position, and that his history with women is non-existent, because a true gentleman does not keep that kind of memory. Gil does not feel that he is lying, but even so he does not consider that a very friendly introduction. Gil states that he had no intention of suspecting or deeply investigating Lizel's identity, but admits feeling curious. Then Lizel decides to get straight to the point. Opening the map on the table, he asks Gil to explain the situation of the indicated region. Gil answers that there is Pardetta, the capital of the kingdom of Markad, a mercantile country. Beside it is Cabana, the land of magical minerals. He explains that, in the past, Markad and Cabana had several conflicts, but that recently the situation has been relatively calm. For Lizel, all of that confirms what he already suspected. That was, without a doubt, the heart of a great mercantile nation. Cabana has many natural resources and large mines. Then, he asks Gillet's opinion, which reflects the view of the capital. However, he is too lazy to answer, finding the question far too vague. Lizel then asks him to briefly say what he thinks. Gil concludes that that is already enough for him. Gillet replies that there are good inns, plentiful food, and reasonable jobs. In addition, it is a comfortable place for adventurers. This gives Lizel an idea, since many people need to go back and forth from the capital. That being so, in that country, no one would pay much attention. Lizel says that, at first, he only planned to ask a few questions, but ends up asking if he would accept a favor. Gil asks what it is about, and he explains that the pay would be very high for the information he provided. Then, he asks if he would accept being his guide, perhaps as a bodyguard or vigilant adventurer to accompany her. Gil was alone and says that he was joking, but that comment from Lizel caught him off guard. He states that he would like it to be all of them. The dark-haired man asks him to at least pretend that he is asking whether that is really what he wanted. Lizel replies that yes, but that, in the end, the decision is exclusively his. Gil sighs and asks for how long he intends to hire him. Lizel says that, for now, it will only be 1 month. In the first days, he would need to accompany him and explain many things. After that, it would be enough to be present whenever he needed him. Gil makes it clear that he will not reveal his true job and asks how much he intends to pay for all of this. Lizel shows his negotiating side, asking how far he would be willing to go for the payment. Gil faces this naturally and accepts, asking who he thinks he is talking to. Then, Lizel closes the door and says that he will make his first request. After that, they go to the guild. The dark-haired man explains the basics. Adventurers accept tasks requested by other people, and the guild acts as an intermediary. Next, they approach the reception, where they are informed that the guild master is not present at the moment, being advised to return another day. But Gil insists, and without further delay the employee introduces himself as Stu and asks Lizel to use a specific device. He does so, spilling a drop of blood that, when it falls, makes the sheet shine. The process is completed. Stu hands over the guild card and takes some books to explain the applications of the job. He mentions that the guild provides encyclopedias about monsters and plants, which can be consulted for free. If they have doubts, they can ask directly at the reception. Lizel asks whether these encyclopedias are sold. but Stu replies that no, they are only for local consultation, and it is forbidden to take any book out of the building. Next, he takes a small piece of paper and draws a map indicating a bookstore that sells books of various specialties. Lizel thanks him and, as a form of gratitude, pats his head before taking his leave. 3 days later, Lizel is seen reading. At that moment, Gil knocks on the door and enters the room. He hands him the report and asks how it went with the request he made. Gil replies that everything went fine and asks if he does not get tired of reading so much. He picks up a book and reads the first paragraph he finds, while Lizel continues the narrative from memory, showing that he has already read them all. Gil comments asking if he liked the reading, but to him, all of that seems like just a big piece of nonsense. They close the books, and Lizel observes that it is already almost noon. Then, they decide to have lunch and then stop by the guild again. Gil asks if he will finally accept a job, and Lizel replies that yes. Upon arriving at the guild, Lizel greets Stu, who obviously remembers him. After all, it would be impossible to forget the noble who patted his head. Lizel sits down and says that they came to hear what was still missing from the explanation before accepting the job. At that moment, another adventurer speaks loudly, looking at him in a strange way. The impulse has just arrived, and he exclaims that Gil has really sunk very low, since he wanted to see who had joined the famous adventurer. He tries to provoke, but ends up revealing only rude behavior, despite his refined, almost noble appearance. Both Gil and Lizel ignore him, and Stu hands over a list according to the guild's rules. The adventurer continues complaining to Gil, questioning why he refused the invitation from their group to join a novice, asking what was so special about him. Gil merely stares at him with disdain and asks who he thinks he is. This irritates the adventurer even more. Gil coldly tells him not to talk to someone he does not know, since they are not friends. At that moment, the adventurer asks an indecent question, insinuating whether that person referring to Lizel was really that good. Gil responds in a cold and direct way that he is, at the very least, in a much better situation than his. Stu and Lizel listen to the conversation, and Lizel comments that Gil's contract was only for 1 month, but that maybe it would be better to end it right there. Stu considers the comment indecent. Even so, for Lizel, the biggest problem was the fact that they were speaking ill of Gil. The adventurer asks what he said. Lizel stands up from the chair and, looking him straight in the eyes, clarifies that he and Gil joined forces because they made an agreement. The adventurer calls him presumptuous for having bought the stab wound and now believing that someone like Gil would be important. Lizel asks if he really thinks that Gil would sell himself for a few coins. If that were the case, he says that he could pay more than him at that very moment. Although he doubts that would be enough to convince him, this irritates the adventurer, who boasts by saying that he is also a rank B adventurer, just like Gil. Upon hearing that, Lizel congratulates him. The adventurer laughs, thinking that he has won the argument. However, Lizel shows clear dissatisfaction. He states that it is especially concerning for someone like him to dare compare himself to something that clearly belongs to him, referring to Gil. This enrages the adventurer, who draws his sword and calls him a bastard. He immediately lunges forward to attack him. Stu prepares to intervene, but Gil steps in front, blocks the strike, and splits the man's sword in half. The adventurer is left speechless. Next, Gil turns around and kicks him, throwing him against the wall. At that moment, Lizel turns to Stu and realizes that he is about to use magic, but stops him by grabbing his wrist, reminding him that guild staff cannot get involved in fights between adventurers. Stu cancels the magic and emphasizes that he can only act if arbitration is requested, since that is not forbidden. Lizel understands the situation and comments that he was worried about being punished. He then hands over money to cover the damage to the wall, asking that they leave the work matter for another day. Thus, they leave the guild. Back in the lodgings, Gil drinks a glass of alcohol. He reflects that, at that moment, his body moved by pure instinct, unable to avoid protecting Lizel. He remembers the words he said to the adventurer about not comparing himself to Gil's position, and, above all, about having stated that he belonged to him. Gil laughs at that, saying that he is not even his knight. Even so, the situation makes him reflect. On a new day, We see the group gathered together having breakfast. Lizel praises the taste of the food, something Gil clearly does not fully believe. At that moment, the captain of the knights abruptly enters the place, demanding to know about a man who is supposedly pretending to be a noble and staying there. The owner of the establishment, visibly irritated, asks him not to accuse her customers of something so strange without proof. But the captain insists and requests permission to verify the information. Soon, he spots our protagonist serving tea. The captain is startled, freezes in place, and immediately apologizes for his rudeness, believing he is facing a noble. Lizel reassures him and clarifies that he is not a noble, but rather an adventurer. The captain asks him to stop pretending and not to lie in that way. After the incident, Lizel and Gil leave the place and head out to start their day. Walking toward the forest, our protagonist comments that he hopes to learn much more from Gil as an adventurer. Gil tells him to stop talking like that, saying that if he keeps it up, it will never happen. Lizel understands the message and, changing her approach, asks him to teach her many things. Gil says that he also does not like it when he speaks that way and changes the subject. Pointing to a place where there is a rat, Lizel is surprised both by the situation and by the size of the animal. Gil explains that it is a prairie rat, a type of monster. If they defeat 10 of them that day, the mission will be completed. But he warns that they need to be careful, since they are fast. However, our protagonist does not listen to the warning and summons a magic weapon, instantly eliminating the rat. Gil complains, asking if he cannot go even a minute without frightening the people around him. Lizel apologizes, wondering if she may have gone too far. Gil replies that anyone would be surprised to see something like that suddenly appear and attack. Lizel asks whether, in that world, weapons fire lead bullets. Gil confirms and comments that they are difficult to use. Because of that, Lizel remarks that his weapon works differently and points to her own head, making Gil extend his hand in caution. Lizel explains that the weapon does not fire ordinary projectiles, but magic, and proves it by defeating 2 more rats. After that, they continue the mission as normal. After completing the job, they return to the guild and choose another mission. They find one that involves collecting objects down to the 5th level of a labyrinth for a collector. For this, an appraisal certificate is required, with a base reward of 10 silver coins. The guild explains that their position is suitable for reaching the 5th level, and that, under those conditions, the reward is fair. Lizel decides to accept the mission, sits down with Stu, and watches as the dark-haired man records everything. He asks whether truly any object will do, even something simple like a pin. Stu confirms, explaining that as long as it is something exclusive to that labyrinth, everything is valid, which seems perfect for Lizel. The conversation then shifts to the reason why so many people are gathered in that place. They discover that a new labyrinth appeared a few days ago, and many adventurers are trying to clear it, facing great difficulty. Gil asks what benefit there is in simply observing all of that in silence. Stu explains that the problem is not the monsters, but the riddles, which are complex and need to be solved quickly. Gil understands that they are interested in the bonus for completing the labyrinth. Lizel asks what that means, and Gil explains that it is a special reward granted only to the first group that completes the challenge. Stu adds that this directly influences an adventurer's rank, and that almost no one accepts ordinary jobs because of it. He comments to our protagonist that, if he is interested, he could keep an eye on those tables, as that is where the first cryptogram usually appears. Lizel reads the notice and asks Gil for his opinion, but he tells her not to even think about it, since their path is already decided. With the registration completed, everything is settled. They are about to leave when Lizel feels curious and asks for a moment to observe more closely. She's a blonde man and reads his notes, realizing that they are numbers written in a very ancient and extremely organized language. Shortly after, she steps away. The man is confused, while his companions ask whether she stole any information. He replies that no, that did not happen. Now, we follow our protagonist walking through the forest. He cannot stop thinking about those ancient letters because he recognizes them very well. Intrigued, he wonders whether that world might be part of his past or his present. A few minutes later, they arrive at the labyrinth. Gil opens the door, and the two enter. Inside, Lizel walks around casually, looking for the objects required for the mission. Gil explains that everything is completely random, and that the only way is to keep moving forward. Lizel asks whether there is a boss on the deepest level. Gil confirms, but makes it clear that it is not such a powerful enemy. Suddenly, an arrow is fired. Gil reacts quickly and protects our protagonist. He asks why the attack was aimed at him. Gil replies that he does not know, but says that both of them need to be more cautious from that point on. Going down some stairs, they arrive at a room with 2 chests. Gil comments that they were very lucky, since they appeared already on the 2nd level. Our protagonist opens one of them and finds something unusual. They take the items to an appraiser, who receives 2 stuffed animals and hesitates when evaluating their value. He says they are worth quite a lot, but that he could buy them. Lizel refuses, thanks him, and asks only for a certificate proving that they are objects from the labyrinth. Thinking about how to deliver them, he decides to wrap them as a gift, along with a small bread roll. At night, we see the presents at the guild's reception desk, with Stu taking care of them. Lizel opens the door for Gil, and the two talk about morning people and about who helped with the cryptogram earlier. At that moment, a group appears in front of the inn. The leader introduces himself as Eeg and asks our protagonist for help in advancing to the next stage of the labyrinth. Lizel demands 50% of the total reward, which sounds absurd to them. He then makes it clear that he gains nothing from helping for free and that he will only go if he is properly rewarded. After hearing this, Ain becomes irritated but eventually agrees to split the reward. The next day, while our protagonist is still sleeping, the group enters his room with Gil's authorization. Lizel then asks for the note. After reading everything carefully, he asks her to come closer, almost without realizing it, still half asleep. He explains exactly what needs to be done. The blonde man begins writing everything down intensely, almost obsessively. However, our protagonist ends up falling asleep again. Later, Lizel and Gil meet at the guild. Looking at the available requests on the mission board, Lizel notices that, up to that point, no one has applied for the bodyguard job. Gil comments that this should not even draw attention, since he still needs to reach rank C to accept that type of mission. At that moment, Stu appears and asks for a moment with our protagonist. He explains that the person who requested the job the other day has finally arrived and wishes to meet him personally, as they were extremely pleased with what they received and want to express their gratitude directly. The two follow Stu, and soon we see them waiting inside a private room. Shortly after, a well-dressed blonde man enters the room. Upon seeing our protagonist, he seems to think there has been some mistake. Stu corrects him, saying there was no error at all. Our protagonist then greets him and introduces himself as the one who accepted the request. The man appears surprised and comments that he has never met an adventurer like him before. He invites him to sit down and introduces himself as Ray, a viscount and administrator of the military police. Getting straight to the point, Ray makes it clear how grateful he is for the opportunity to see such beautiful objects, especially given how carefully they were wrapped. While taking a sip of tea, he places a gold coin on the table and asks whether Lizel accepts that as payment for the emotion he provided. Lizel also drinks his tea and, placing the cup over the coin, replies that he accepts the extra payment. Seeing this, Ray stands up and shakes his hand, saying that he hopes they will get along well from that moment on. Lizel thanks him, but comments that it is far too much for an F-rank adventurer. Ray then clarifies that he is not referring to business. Touching his own chest, he says that he simply wishes to be his friend on a personal level. Faced with that, Lizel accepts. At that moment, a strange look appears on the blonde man's face. Before leaving, he comments that he would like to invite him someday to visit his home and see his collection. With that, he takes his leave. Alone again, Lizel comments to Gil that, after that meeting, her suspicions about Ray were finally confirmed, resolving any remaining doubts. Meanwhile, Ray looks at his own hand and comments that our protagonist remained completely calm throughout the entire meeting, showing no fear at all. To him, that seems perfect for starting a genuine friendship. That night, Lizel, Gil, and the protagonist are drinking together. They comment that Ain and his group managed to be the first to complete the challenge and emerged victorious. Lizel asks Gil whether that reward is really worth so much. Gil replies that the amount is enough to buy equipment of a higher rank than his own. Lizel then asks why Gil remains at rank B. He replies that he prefers to work alone. Still, Lizel comments that she does not fully believe that explanation. Gil then admits that rank adventurers tend to deal more directly with nobles, which requires specific behavior, something that deeply bothers him. Lizel understands his reasoning. Lizel hands him his monthly salary. Gil then speaks politely. He clarifies that it was his own decision, something he chose to do because he wanted to, and that there is no need to get more deeply involved. After that, he sits down again and returns the money. The following day, we see Lizel and Gil traveling inside a carriage. Gil notices that the coachman is extremely attentive, imagining that he has also mistaken Lizel for some kind of noble. The protagonist does not judge him for that, since they are heading toward a mansion. From there on, we follow what had happened a few hours earlier. While Lizel and Gil were inside the guild, one adventurer comments to another about whether it was true that Impulse had formed a group, and they soon confirm that this had indeed happened. While Stud is drafting a document, he asks Lizel if he is certain about this decision. He answers by questioning whether it would not be a good idea. To him, it seemed like something positive. Stud agrees, saying that he will not oppose his choices. Then, he looks seriously at Gil and asks if he believes that he has already grown attached to her. Stud states that he did not say anything like that, but warns that Gil must not put her at risk just because he is no longer her official bodyguard. Gil is left speechless by this, so Stud takes Lizel's hand and shows the mark left on her wrist. Lizel jokes, reminding him that Gil almost cried while begging her not to leave him. At the moment when Stud hands over the identification, he comments that he still has one more thing to deliver, a letter clearly addressed to Lizel. As soon as she sees it, she understands that it was sent by the king, questioning whether that could not be considered an abuse of authority. Stud explains that, since it is a personal letter, there was no way to refuse it. After reading its contents, Lizel hands the letter to her eagle. In it, they are invited to visit the mansion to see a valuable collection. Since they had already been invited, Lizel decides to accept, in addition to feeling curious about the labyrinth collection, especially because nothing good usually comes from that. Stud comments that they can get there using the carriage service of the central district, and that they can go even today, because he is sure that the Viscount will allow their entry. We then return to the present. At the entrance of the mansion, a butler receives them and leads them inside. During the walk, Lizel is impressed by the large number of paintings spread throughout the place. At a certain moment, her eyes are drawn to a painting of a green dragon. Soon after, Ray appears, thanking them for the visit and saying that he is happy to show his valuable collection. He asks the three of them to treat each other as friends, as if he were just one of them. Lizel tries to do so, but still maintains a very formal tone, while for Gil it sounds more natural, even going so far as to call Ray annoying. Thus, they begin the tour. Lizel asks if all those works came from labyrinths, and if the figures portrayed were real people. Ray confirms, explaining that those paintings function as records of the labyrinths. For Gil, they are just objects discarded by adventurers, who often abandon everything if something goes wrong. Ray finds this regrettable, since some pieces are worth more than many jewels. He also comments that certain paintings are valuable simply because of what they represent. Next, they see a painting dedicated to Lizel and Gil, as if they were important figures of a labyrinth. Lizel comments that Gil looked good in the portrait, making the dark-haired man ask for silence. Ray explains that that painting cost a fortune. Lizel moves closer to observe it better and comments on how strong adventurers seem to be very popular. Ray agrees, saying that strength is important, but appearance also counts a lot, to the point where women fight at auctions. He mentions Gyron, saying that this only happened once. Lizel feels relieved for not being valued only for her appearance, but for who she is. No one disagrees with Gil, who wonders if one day he will also have a painting of his own, although the idea of falling into the hands of a stranger frightens him. Ray assures that, if that happens, he will pay whatever is necessary to acquire it. Then, he hands a letter to Lizel. She asks the reason, and the blonde responds that it is an amulet for when they visit Marcade. Lizel hesitates to accept it, finding it unlikely that an adventurer of her level would have that chance. Rei states that this moment will still come, and Lizel accepts the gift. After that, they head to the house next door to see the rest of the collection. On another day, we see the protagonist walking through the city. People greet her with respect, calling her a noble lady. Lizel tries to clarify that she is not, but ends up getting tired and accepts it. Next, she arrives at the shop of an appraiser, who congratulates her on the formation of the group. Lizel thanks him and, without delay, takes out an artifact for evaluation. George explains that it is an infallible hourglass, an artifact that does not change weight regardless of its position. Lizel laments not possessing more common adventurer items. For George, this is not a problem because he finds it incredible to be able to analyze new artifacts. Confident, Lizel ends up receiving a pat on the head, becoming a little embarrassed. While they observe other items, George comments that, a few days earlier, a collector had shown his collection of paintings and asks if they usually bring these works to the shop. He confirms that they do. Lizel mentions that there was a painting of Gil, which seemed very expensive. George comments that just imagining Gil posing is already intimidating, but when he looks at Lizel, he begins to imagine how she would look in a painting. Lizel then asks if he does not buy the paintings he appraises. George replies that he does, since he has a distributor. She asks if that is all, and he explains that there are shops specialized in labyrinth paintings, but that they are located in Marcade. Lizel realizes that Marcade is very far away. Noticing his thoughtful look, George asks if she plans to go there. Faced with the curiosity, he reveals that his grandfather lives in that place and that he intends to visit him soon. If Lizel goes to Marcade, he would like to accompany them as an escort. Lizel makes it clear that she has never worked as a bodyguard and believes that the ideal would be to hire someone more experienced. George lowers his head, embarrassed, and says that he admires Lizel very much. For now, she does not accept, but promises to talk to Gil to try to reach an agreement. After that, he says goodbye. Alone, George sighs in relief, saying that he does not believe that Lizel is just a kind person. Next, we return to the guild. Lizel informs Stu that the shop employee will send a request soon. Stu acknowledges it, mentioning Yuji, since they sometimes ask for help in evaluating labyrinth items. He explains that everything began when the guild asked for help from George's grandfather, who is famous for extremely precise evaluations. He was the one who took George home while he was still a baby, realizing early on his great talent. As George and Stu were the same age, they talked occasionally, although Stu makes it clear that they never actually became friends. Setting this aside a little, the subject shifts to the trip to Marcade and whether Lizel intends to remain there for some time. He replies that he will only do some sightseeing, since he does not know the place. Both know that they will not see each other for a while. So Stu asks whether he intends to accept any work that day. As Lizel says that she does not, Stu invites her to accompany him during the break to a place known for serving excellent coffee. Lizel gladly accepts the proposal, although Stu's colleagues exchange strange looks among themselves. Already at the shop, they ask Stu if he does not usually take breaks. He replies that, as long as he is not tired, he sees no reason for that, and then asks Lizel if it was inconvenient to bring up a topic that had no relation to work. Lizel answers that it was not, and that, in fact, she enjoyed the conversation. Stu then notices that the bruise on her wrist has disappeared. Lizel comments that Gil did not squeeze that hard. Stu jokes, saying that he would have liked to see the companion crying, begging her not to leave him, which makes him laugh. Lizel finds it amusing and comments that the coffee is really very good, unlike other places. At that moment, some adventurers appear looking for the protagonist, saying that she is the one who allied herself with Gil. They warn that, if she is paying to be there, it would be better to forget about it. The place falls silent until Lizel stands up and asks them to talk outside. Before that, she apologizes to Stu, but he responds coldly that he wants to spend some time with Lizel. The protagonist states that other adventurers may appear another day, but that now she will do whatever is necessary to ensure that he stays there. Irritated at being ignored, the adventurers bang on the table and mockingly say that they are great friends. Stu replies that yes, they are very close, and warns that if they continue interrupting, it will ruin their careers. Then, he freezes one of their arms and warns that if it does not thaw quickly, he will lose his hand. Thus, they end up leaving. Lizel tells Stu that he should not do such dangerous things, not because she disagrees. Outside the city, Stu warns George to return as quickly as possible and deliver something, giving him a light tap on the head for not understanding. George jokingly replies that he only grew in height. With everyone already in the carriage, Stu asks them to be careful, and Lizel replies that they will return soon. During the trip, George comments that Stu is always a little sarcastic with Lizel. He explains that this happens because they get along very well. The conversation highlights how comfortable the carriage is. George thanks them, but Lizel asks if he really needs him, even possessing spatial magic. George explains that there are many materials and tools that reject any type of magic. Enjoying the breeze, Lizel comments on how relaxing the sensation is. Gil disagrees, yawning, saying that it does not sharpen his senses. Lizel asks if he says that because of his perception abilities, those he always talks about but rarely feels. Gil replies that it comes from habit, and that to achieve that, one would need to spend time in a place where, if he felt nothing, he would die. Observing all of this, Lizel notices a small door on the ceiling and asks George if he can open it. He replies that it is enough to push it. Thus, Gil orders him to keep driving and not be afraid. George does not understand what is happening. At that moment, a group of completely green plants appears. George becomes tense, but Lizel reassures him. Already on the roof, George asks if the horses do not get scared by loud noises. Gil replies that they do not. Then Lizel cannot hold back. She pulls out her magic weapon and fires with precision, immediately eliminating all the plants. George, in turn, questions whether that weapon was always so powerful, imagining the protagonist with something like that and supposing that it would cost a great fortune.